You know that specific kind of silence you only find on a lake at sunrise, the kind where the only sound is the water lapping against the shore and the distant cry of a loon, creating a sanctuary that feels almost holy? That was Lake Oakhaven to my family for 3 generations, a slice of heaven in Blackwood Falls, Wisconsin, where the air smells like cedar and old memories, until Barbara Vance rolled down the hill in her custom-lifted golf cart, like a general inspecting the front lines of a war only she knew was happening. She didn't just want to control the neighborhood. She wanted to sterilize nature itself, acting as if she held the deed to the sunlight and the water, totally unaware that while she strutted around playing the suburban dictator, I was holding a nuclear option that proved I literally owned the ground beneath her perfectly manicured feet. It started about 6 months after I moved back to the family cabin, a weathered A-frame that had seen better days, specifically to take care of my father, Sergeant Major Thomas "Pop" Miller, a man who left his legs in a rice paddy in '68 and came back with a Bronze Star and a lifetime of night terrors that only seemed to fade when he had a fishing line in the water. We aren't rich people. We're just the kind of folks who hold on to things, which is why we were still there when the developers came in and bulldozed the forest across the bay to build the gables at Oakhaven, a soulless collection of McMansions that looked like they were ordered from a catalog for people who hate trees. Barbara, the self-appointed president of the Gables Community Association, was a woman who treated life like a manager she needed to speak to, constantly patrolling the perimeter with a clipboard and a scowl that could curdle milk. The first time she descended upon us, Pop was sitting in his wheelchair on the public easement strip, just enjoying the morning sun under a cheap blue shade canopy we'd bought at a hardware store, and I watched her march over, heels crunching on the gravel, looking at us like we were a stain on her designer carpet. She didn't say hello, didn't ask how the fishing was. She just pulled out a laser measuring tool, pointed it at Pop's wheelchair, and announced that our temporary structure was violating the Gables Visual Harmony Ordinance, threatening to have my 72-year-old disabled father arrested for vagrancy if we didn't pack up our encampment immediately. I tried to be reasonable, I really did, explaining that this was public access land and we had been fishing here since before the internet was invented, but Barbara wasn't hearing it, her face turning that dangerous shade of crimson as she shoved a citation into my chest, a piece of paper that looked official but smelled like inkjet desperation, claiming she was the deputy compliance officer for the county. Pop, being the man he is, just gave me that look, the one that says don't engage with the enemy when you don't have the high ground. So we packed up in silence while she filmed us with her phone, narrating a story about homeless drifters to her Facebook followers. And that was her first mistake, assuming our silence was surrender when it was actually just reloading. That night, unable to sleep because the image of her mocking my father's disability kept playing on a loop in my head, I went down to the basement and started digging through Granddad's old filing cabinets, sifting through decades of yellowed paper, tax returns, and survey maps until I found it. A thick envelope bound in twine that smelled like mildew and victory. See, my granddad was a shrewd man, an environmental consultant before that was even a real job. And when he sold the surface rights to the land that became the Gables back in the 50s, he retained something crucial, something Barbara and her developer husband, Richard Vance, clearly hadn't bothered to check: the mineral rights. I wasn't just looking at a deed, I was looking at a weapon, specifically the rights to a massive limestone deposit that ran directly under Barbara's living room, meaning I had the legal authority to turn her quiet cul-de-sac into an active industrial quarry if I wanted to. But Barbara, blissfully unaware that she was living on top of a legal landmine, decided to escalate the war the very next morning by leaving a fake official notice on my windshield, signed with a title that didn't exist, threatening a $500 daily fine for unauthorized recreational activity. I called the county clerk, a nice lady named Mrs. Higgins, just to confirm my suspicions, and when I asked for the deputy compliance officer, the silence on the other end was so long I thought the call dropped until she laughed and told me no such position existed, confirming that Barbara was impersonating a government official, which is a federal crime, but I didn't want to just stop her. I wanted to bury her. I went back to the lake, set up a camouflage trail camera in the brush, and let her dig her own grave, capturing hours of footage of her harassing other locals, measuring the grass height of her neighbors with a ruler, and threatening a young couple with a towing company that she didn't actually have a contract with. But things got dark when Old Man Silas, a fisherman who's been part of the lake's ecosystem for 50 years, pulled me aside with shaking hands to tell me that Barbara had started a private Facebook group called Secure Oak Haven, posting pictures of Pop in his wheelchair with captions labeling us as dangerous transients and potential drug dealers, whipping the new residents into a frenzy of fear. She wasn't just being a nuisance anymore. She was actively painting a target on the back of a man who had already given his legs for his country. And that's when the cold, hard rage settled in my chest, the kind that makes your vision sharp and your patience absolute. I started digging into her husband, Richard, and his construction company, Vance and Partners, and discovered they were bleeding money, owing nearly $1 million in back taxes and leveraging their house, the very house sitting on my limestone, as collateral for loans they were defaulting on. They were desperate, terrified of losing their status, and Barbara was lashing out at anything she couldn't control, trying to turn the public lake into her private moat to boost her property value. But she had no idea she was poking a bear that knew how to read geological surveys. Barbara escalated again, hiring a budget security firm to place traffic cones across the public access road, putting up private property signs that looked incredibly convincing, and even hiring an off-duty mall cop to stand there and intimidate families trying to launch their kayaks, effectively seizing public land through brute force and bluff. I watched all of this, cataloging every violation, every illegal blockade, every fake citation, and then I called my old college roommate, Elena, who just happens to be the fiercest property rights attorney in the Midwest, and told her, "I think I own a subdivision, and I think I want to turn it into a park." Elena drove up the next day, took one look at the mineral rights deed and the original easement contract I found, a document that guaranteed public access in perpetuity, and she started laughing, a terrifying sound that signaled the end of Barbara's reign. "You realize," Elena said, sipping coffee at my kitchen table while looking at the map of the Gables, "that under Wisconsin law, the mineral rights holder has the right to access the surface to extract the resources, meaning you can legally drive a bulldozer through her front garden, and she can't say a damn word." We were sitting on a powder keg, and Barbara was running around with a lit match, unaware that the explosion wasn't going to hurt us, it was going to obliterate her entire world. While Elena was preparing the legal equivalent of a tactical nuclear strike, Barbara decided to cross the line from harassment to hate crime when a Hispanic family, the Riveras, showed up for a picnic, innocent folks just wanting to enjoy the water, and Barbara didn't call the police. She called Immigration and Customs Enforcement, claiming a suspicious encampment of illegals was forming on the beach. The sheer malice of it, the weaponization of government agencies against a family playing with a frisbee, made my blood run cold, but I kept my cool, documenting everything, knowing that she was handing me the discrimination case of the century on a silver platter. I filed a formal complaint with the Department of Justice, citing the Americans with Disabilities Act for her treatment of Pop and the blatant racial profiling of the Riveras, creating a paper trail that would soon turn into a stranglehold. Then, I made the call that would change the landscape of Blackwood Falls forever, dialing up Big Jim, the operations manager at Badger State Aggregates, and asking him if he'd be interested in surveying a high-grade limestone deposit sitting conveniently under a failing luxury development. Big Jim showed up with a team of geologists and surveying equipment that beeped and flashed, walking the property lines of the Gables in high-visibility vests, and you should have seen Barbara come running out of her house, screaming about trespassing and waving her phone like a weapon. I just smiled, handed her a copy of the mineral rights deed, and said, "Just doing a little exploration, ma'am, strictly routine." Watching her face crumble as Hank, our surveyor, pounded a bright orange stake directly into her prize-winning rose garden, because, legally, that was the optimal extraction point. The rumor mill in town went into overdrive. The local paper ran a headline asking if the Gables was about to become a quarry, and suddenly, the neighbors Barbara had bullied into submission started looking at her not as their leader, but as the reason their property values were about to plummet to zero. Desperate people do stupid things, and Barbara was spiraling, waking up at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday to call 911, reporting armed men threatening residents at the boat launch, a swatting attempt designed to get us killed by trigger-happy deputies. I was pouring coffee for Pop when two cruisers drifted in, lights silent but flashing, officers' hands on their holsters, tension thick enough to choke on, until Sergeant Miller, no relation, just a good man, recognized Pop from the VFW hall and lowered his guard. I handed the sergeant the stack of fake citations, the video of Barbara impersonating an official, and the logs of her false reports, and watched his face harden as he looked over at Barbara, who was standing by her golf cart with a smug grin that vanished the second the officer turned his back on us and started walking toward her with his handcuffs unclipped. They didn't arrest her that day, but they gave her a warning that echoed across the lake, telling her that filing a false police report was a crime and that she was now on the official "Do Not Respond" list for non-emergencies, stripping her of the only power she had left. But Barbara, unable to accept defeat, decided to go full criminal, slipping out of her house at 2 a.m. like a villain in a bad spy movie to pull up our survey stakes and throw them into the lake, unaware that my trail cameras, now upgraded to 4K night vision, were capturing every frame of her felony vandalism. She didn't stop there. She dumped used motor oil near our fishing spot to simulate an environmental hazard so she could report us to the EPA, an act of sabotage that would end up costing thousands to clean up and proving that she didn't care about the lake. She only cared about her control over it. We had her on destruction of property, environmental contamination, and harassment, but the final nail in the coffin came from an unexpected ally, Councilman Sterling, a man usually known for being slippery, who approached me at the hardware store looking pale and shaken. He told me that Barbara had come to his office with an envelope stuffed with cash, $10,000, asking him to misplace my mineral rights application, a blatant bribery attempt that he had recorded because he was already under investigation for something else and was trying to turn state's witness. We had everything: the bribery, the vandalism, the false reports, the discrimination, and the cherry on top was the discovery that her husband, Richard, had illegally filled and protected wetlands to expand their backyard, a violation that carried massive federal fines. It was time to end it. We scheduled a town hall meeting, nominally to discuss the future of the lake, but in reality, it was an ambush, a public unveiling of the truth in front of the entire town, the press, and the very neighbors she had manipulated. Barbara arrived with a team of lawyers who looked like they charged by the minute and clearly hadn't been told the full story, strutting into the community center like she was royalty arriving at a coronation, completely unaware that the projector screen behind the podium was loaded with a presentation that would dismantle her life slide by slide. The room was packed, tension vibrating in the air, divided between the wealthy residents of the Gables and the locals who had been pushed out, everyone waiting for the spark that would ignite the powder keg we had been sitting on for months. The air in the community center was heavy, smelling of stale coffee and impending doom, as Councilman Sterling called the meeting to order, his voice shaking slightly, because he knew what was coming. Barbara's lead attorney, a slick guy named Mr. Thorne, stood up and gave a polished, empty speech about preserving the character of the neighborhood and protecting homeowners from industrial overreach, painting me as a greedy corporate raider trying to destroy their paradise. And for a moment, I saw the neighbors nodding along, buying into the narrative she had spun. Then it was my turn. I didn't give a speech. I just dimmed the lights and clicked a button, projecting a massive, high-definition video of Barbara at 3 a.m., crowbar in hand, destroying the survey stakes, followed immediately by the audio recording of her trying to bribe the councilman, her voice clear and shrill as she offered cash to bury my legal rights. The silence in that room was absolute, a vacuum where all the air had been sucked out, broken only by the gasp of Barbara's husband, Richard, who looked like he was having a cardiac event as he realized his wife had just incriminated them both in federal crimes. I didn't stop there. I brought up the EPA report showing the illegal wetland filling on their property, overlaying it with a map of the limestone deposit, and announced, "We aren't just here to talk about a quarry. We are here to talk about the fact that the Gables HOA has been systematically violating a 70-year-old public access easement." I looked directly at the crowd of homeowners and said, "She didn't tell you, did she? Every single one of your deeds mandates public access to the lake. She's been making you break the law for years." Barbara snapped. She leaped to her feet, screaming that the video was fake, that I was a socialist, that Pop wasn't really disabled, a meltdown so pure and unhinged that the local news cameras captured every spittle-flecked second of it. She called the townspeople peasants and riffraff, finally saying the quiet part out loud, exposing the ugly, elitist rot at the core of her soul, and you could physically feel the room turn against her, the neighbors recoiling as if she were radioactive. Pop wheeled himself to the microphone then, the room quieting out of respect, and said simply, "I fought for this country so everyone could be free, not so a specific tax bracket could own the sunset." And the applause that followed was deafening, a wave of sound that washed away Barbara's power for good. The aftermath was swift and brutal. The judge granted an immediate injunction against the HOA. Fines totaling nearly $100,000 were levied against the community association, and criminal charges for bribery and vandalism were filed against Barbara before the week was out. 3 weeks later, the for sale sign went up in Barbara's yard, a white flag of surrender on the lawn she had obsessively manicured, and watching the moving trucks load up their gaudy furniture felt like watching a fever break. They moved to Florida, naturally, running from the mess they made, but the victory wasn't just them leaving, it was what happened next. I executed the buyout clause of the mineral rights, purchasing 5 of the waterfront properties at a premium, generous enough that the families were happy to leave. And instead of opening a massive industrial pit, I worked with Big Jim to do selective extraction, using the revenue to fund the Miller Veterans Park. We ripped out the illegal fill, restored the wetlands, and built a fully accessible fishing pier where wheelchairs could roll right to the water's edge, a permanent monument to the fight we had won. The lake is quiet again now, but it's a different kind of quiet. It's the peace of a place that belongs to everyone. Yesterday, I watched Pop teaching a neighbor's kid how to cast a line, the sun glinting off the water, and I realized that while we technically own the mineral rights, you can't really own a lake, you can only protect it. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? In a world where everything is for sale and Karen has become a verb, where is the line between property rights and human decency? And why does it take a disabled veteran and a threat of a limestone quarry to remind people that some things, like the view of a sunrise over the water, are supposed to be free? Justice isn't always a gavel. Sometimes it's just an old man fishing in peace, knowing the woman who tried to stop him is sitting in traffic somewhere in Florida, wondering how she lost a war against a ghost and a clipboard.